what happened to the Jesuits around the world? There were about 23,000 members in the whole society at the time of the suppression. The novices and the novices were, of course, immediately dismissed from the novitiate. The scholastics and brothers had their vows remitted. They were dismissed also. The priests were told that, according to the brief of suppression, the priests were told that they could become members of the secular or diocesan clergy or of other religious orders by a special benevolence of the Holy See, only had to spend maybe a brief time in the novitiate of the other orders if the other orders would accept them. There was, of course, no such thing as a dispensation from clerical celibacy for any of them. The property of the society was subject to a lot of local inconsistencies. The actual real estate was almost always taken over by the state, or the government in particular places, the city or the duchy or the kingdom, whatever it was, but in a few instances also by the diocese, or given by the diocese or by the state to other religious orders. Apart from the real estate itself, the things that we had in the institutions, especially our libraries, were irreparably lost to the society. At the best, they would be picked up and taken by the government for their own relatively new national libraries. A good portion of the national libraries of various countries in Europe are the old libraries of the Jesuit colleges or of the professed houses. That was the best kind of situation. In the worst situation, the libraries would simply be destroyed. There's one instance in one of the towns in Belgium where better than half of an immense library was simply burned, or 3/4, of 500,000 volumes were simply sold as waste paper, because since they dealt with theology, they were obviously utter rubbish. The overseas, we've already talked about what happened with the Spanish and Portuguese Jesuits who were transported back from the missions. Within other places, the foreign missionaries were left to live on until they finally died out. Most poignant in some ways was the situation of the Jesuits, mostly at this point French Jesuits in China, who survived at the imperial court, where they were mathematicians, astronomers, savants, learned people at the service of the emperor. In 1835, on the wall of a house outside Beijing in China, a French Vincentian missionary came upon the epitaph of the Jesuit mission in China. It was written by a man named Joseph Amiot, one of the last of the French Jesuits there. It's very moving. And let me read the whole thing. Says something not only about the Chinese Jesuits, the Jesuits in China, though it's specific to that, but about the whole society. In the name of Jesus, amen. Long shaken, but overcome at last by so many storms, it has fallen. Traveler, stop and read. Reflect for a few moments on the inconstancy of things human. Here lie the French missionaries of that very renowned society, which taught and spread abroad in all its purity the worship of the true God, which, while imitating amid pain and toil, and as far as human weakness allows, Jesus, whose name it bore, lived virtuously, helped the neighbor, and making itself all things to all in order to gain all, for several centuries and more gave to the Church martyrs and confessors. I, Joseph Marie Amiot, and the other French missionaries of the same society, under the patronage and protection of the Chinese monarch, and with the support of the arts and sciences which we practice, still forward the divine cause. While in the imperial palace itself, amid altars of false gods, our church signs with the true magnificence, we, secretly grieving even to the last of our days, have erected here amid burial groves this monument of our brotherly affection. Go, traveler, continue on your way, felicitate the dead, weep for the living, pray for all, wonder, and be silent. It's a very affecting statement of the situation of the society to most Jesuits, former Jesuits now, all over the world, and to those people who had very definitely supported the society and saw no possibility of its ever rising again, although there were people who right after the suppression were beginning to push for its restoration, including such people as one of the sisters of the King of France, who herself was a Carmelite nun and began praying for the restoration immediately. Nobody could have foretold what was going to happen. And if you as a television producer or you as an author of a book had shopped around your TV script or the text of a book to be published, no television company and no publisher would ever have accepted it because it would have lacked all verisimilitude. It could not have happened the way you're describing what happened. But as a matter of fact, it did happen, the survival of the society. And so let's turn to that now in this presentation. What happened? Fundamentally, the survival of the society was due to an intransigent empress, a hesitatingly willing pope to let the Empress Catherine have her way, and to see hesitatingly the Society of Jesus survive, and thirdly, to the work of what came to be known as the Vicars General of the Society in the place where it did survive until the Universal Restoration, especially a man who was a hero for me. For the Western European Society, Father Joseph Pignatelli, now St. Joseph, was a great hero. The man who never gets credit for the actual canonical restoration, canonical survival of the society, was a man named Czerniewicz, the Vicar General in what was the old Polish-Lithuanian section of the society, now part of Russia. Of course, most of us, when we see names that involve CZ together, we turn off. But his name, Czerniewicz, C-Z-E-R-N-I-E-W-I-C-Z. Stanislas Czerniewicz is one of my great heroes in the life of the society. I had told you about, you will see why, I told you about the partition of Poland. When it was partitioned, Russia received 201 Jesuits, 4 colleges, 2 residences. Czerniewicz had earlier been appointed vice-provincial for the eastern part of the province of Mazovia in Poland when it was clear that partition was going to take place. The society wanted to have somebody there as at least a semi-major superior for those parts which were going to be cut off from the other political parts of Poland. Now at the suppression, one diocese after another where the brief was promulgated, now eventually he was the only major superior left, on the one hand. Meanwhile, with the partition, Catherine had gotten as part of her Russian Empire several million Poles. She wanted to keep, who were Catholic. She wanted to keep them happy, obviously. And she set up, even before the suppression of the society, she decided how that group of Polish Latin Catholics were going to be dealt with. She set up a structure for the church in that former Poland, Russian Poland now, completely disregarding the Holy See. She decided where there was to be a diocese. She decided the man who was going to be the bishop. Didn't consult Rome at all on it to start with. She appointed there, as a bishop there, the former auxiliary bishop of Vilnius in what is now Lithuania, Stanislaus Sestranchevich. I'll spell his name once, you don't have to remember it. In the spelling, Siestrzewicz. Everybody gets points if they can immediately spell it back to me. Stanislaus Czerniewicz was appointed the bishop for all of the Latin Catholics in the Russian Empire, and his episcopal see was established at the city of Mohilov, sometimes spelled M-O-G-I-L-E-V, sometimes M-O-H-I-L-E-V. The status of the society a year later at its suppression, when the brief of suppression arrived, was quite clear. Catherine simply forbade Stanislaus Sestranchevich to publish the decree of suppression. She forbade that. She forbade it even becoming public. Czerniewicz knew about it. He wrote to the nuncio in Archbishop Garampi in Warsaw and asked, what are we to do about this? Garampi was very careful to say it's perfectly clear. You are Roman Catholics, you're priests, you're religious, you're members of the former Society of Jesus. It's been suppressed by the Pope. You have the necessity to suppress yourself. But one of the other people under Garampi made quite clear to Czerniewicz, it's true, the brief is public knowledge. You're bound in conscience to suppress yourself, but this is positive law, as you know. There are, of course, things such as divine law, which binds in all circumstances, natural law, which binds in the circumstances in which nature is involved, and positive law. Positive law binds in all circumstances except where it's impossible to carry it out. A long silence, even longer than I have given you here. It was perfectly clear that they were telling Czerniewicz, you got to do it, but if you can't do it, you can't do it. I'm going to be very, very blunt there and say in some ways this position, which kept the nuncio and the people with him in the good graces of the Holy See, doing what the Holy See wanted, and also doing exactly, also recognizing the reality of Catherine's absolute forbidding of the decree of suppression, in a sense that is, they were engaged in posterior protection. You may translate that in any more direct language that you wish. In January 1776, we're now almost 3 years down the line, Czerniewicz and the Polish Jesuits there, wondering still what ought to be done, and not having found any response, were still, troubled in conscience. Czerniewicz even told Catherine that his conscience bound him to try to suppress the society. She very graciously told him he was too scrupulous and she would be perfectly happy to serve as his moral advisor. You can imagine what that would happen to be like. But in any case, in January 1776, Catherine sent to Rome a man named Benislavski, who was the auxiliary bishop to Sestranchevich. Benislavski at one time had been a Jesuit. She wanted to regularize with the Holy See the position of Catholics in her former Polish possessions, now part of her Russian possessions. In other words, to get the okay of Pius VI for what she had arbitrarily done, deciding where a diocese was to be and who the bishop was to be. At the same time, Czerniewicz asked Benislavski, and the Tsarina, Catherine was willing to have this done, asked Benislavski to find out the reaction of Pius VI to the anomalous situation in which they were existing in Russia. So he sent a letter through with Benislavski to Cardinal Rezaniko, who was I believe sort of what we would call the Papal Secretary of State. And he read this letter to Pius VI, telling him the situation of the Jesuits there. As a result of that, when he wrote back to Czerniewicz a letter in Latin, which is absolutely wonderful in its central sentence, for what it says in the briefest possible Latin, and leaves it up to the person who receives it to understand what it really meant. Let me read the Latin to you. It is exactly 8 words. Precarum tuarum exitus ut auguro et exoptas felix. What does that all mean? May the result of your prayers, as I foresee and you desire, be a happy one. What does that mean? What were the prayers of Czerniewicz? Obviously that the society was in good circumstances. Canonically, that he was doing the very best he can. Well, what was Czerniewicz's prayers? That the Holy See would agree with this and that the society would continue to exist. It was Czerniewicz's prayers. Pope's not the Pope's prayers. But I, the Cardinal Secretary, foresee that the result of your prayers are what? What you desire the result to be. That the society is legitimately in existence. It's a wonderful piece of Vatican speak. Precarum tuarum exitus. Of your prayers the result, as I hope, as I foresee and you hope, felix, just happy. May the result of your prayers and as I foresee and you desire be a happy one. As a matter of fact, that is what happened. There were several things that followed as a result of that visit to Rome in 1776. Sestrinchevich was regularized as the Bishop of Mohilov for all of the Latin Catholics in the Russian Empire. He was also given authority over all religious orders in the Russian Empire. Some of the people at the Vatican who were still very opposed to the society saw this as the way for Sestrinchevich to go back home and suppress the society. He received a visitor's power, Sestrinchevich did, for 3 years for all of the religious orders. And this would be a possible way and a time in which to suppress the society canonically in Russia. He did nothing because he was very well aware that he could do nothing. Catherine would never have allowed him to do that. In fact, she would have taken serious measures against him. A few of the Jesuits, the remnant Jesuits there, felt in conscience they simply had to leave the society there because the Pope had suppressed them. Okay, but they also felt that they had publicly to announce the suppression there. Now, it was known, the brief was known, but they wanted publicly to announce it. Apparently, they attempted to do so, and she exiled them way off to Siberia. Bishop Sestrinchevich knew very well what fate would await him if he attempted to suppress the society there. Czerniewicz knew, and Catherine knew too, that there were 3 steps that were absolutely essential for the survival of the society in Russia. The first of them, and all 3 steps were gradually taken. 1776 was almost 3 years after the suppression, this ambiguous statement from Rome. Now, 3 steps in 1778, 1782, and 1783. The first of them, in 1778, Czerniewicz asked Catherine whether it would be possible to start a novitiate. And she said, yes. Czerniewicz then wanted to get some sign from Rome that this would be okay. Didn't bother Catherine. She started building the novitiate before any answer came back from Rome, whether it was okay or not. She wrote to Rome, and she asked that, Catherine asked as a favor, that the Holy See approve the opening of a novitiate. Catherine, as I said, says okay. Sestrinchevich says okay in 1778. The story gets out back to Europe, that this place is starting a novitiate. The Bourbon kings were absolutely apoplectic and threatened the papacy and Catherine. Well, they could do nothing at all to Catherine herself. The Pope flew into a diplomatic rage, publicly saying, this is absolutely null and void, and like she can't possibly do this, and I don't understand what's going on. Catherine threatened, however, the Holy See, that unless things were kept quiet from the Holy See, she might force all of the Latin Rite Catholics into the Russian Orthodox Church. Pius used that very greatly to tell the kings in Western Europe, you're good Catholics. See what she might do to the Catholics there. So please calm down. Be quiet about this. Something else came into the account then, again, nobody could have foreseen. What was going on in those years, 1776, 77, 78, etc., over here in this godforsaken British colony out in the wilds of North America? What was going on? The American Revolution. Who was supporting the United States in the American Revolution? France. Who was France and the colonies over here? Who were they fighting? Great Britain. With whom did Great Britain have a treaty of friendship and commerce? Russia. Catherine at least intimated, didn't threaten directly, but intimated that it might be interesting if she changed the treaty between Russia and Great Britain into a treaty not only of friendship and commerce, but a treaty of alliance. The last thing the French would want would be for the Russians to come in on the side of the British as they, the French and the Americans, were fighting the British. So the French government kept quiet about this particular situation with the Jesuits. Everybody backed down, except Catherine, of course, and the novitiate opened. Because if the novitiate hadn't opened, by that time a certain number of the Polish Jesuits were getting old and died. Some of them had left the society, etc. Nobody could have predicted this move. But with the opening of a novitiate at Polotsk, in what is now Belarus, what was known as White Russia then, but formerly a portion of Poland, with the opening of a novitiate at the college at Polotsk, you had the possibility of the continuation, however tenuous, however exiguous, the continuation of the existence of the society. That was 1778. And things, though, were still not completely regularized. So Czerniewicz asked for an okay from Sestrankiewicz, very polite, diplomatic Vatican protocol, asked for an okay to hold a general congregation. Sestrankiewicz asks Catherine. Catherine says, yes, that's fine. Because then that might be able, the supreme governing body in the society might be able to regularize canonically the situation of Czerniewicz and whoever might succeed him as general or vicar general. Apparently, Sestrankiewicz thought that maybe the congregation would choose him, Sestrankiewicz, as semi-vicar general for the society just to protect it. He had no idea what Jesuits were like. They held the congregation at Polotsk in very difficult conditions. Either that one or the next one they held her, it was so cold that the ink froze in the inkwells, and they had to stop for a day because they didn't have any way of taking down the minutes of the congregation. But in any case, they hold the congregation in 1782, and that general congregation formally chooses Stanislaus Czerniewicz to govern the society there. The Bourbons, of course, heard about this. Again, they were furious. They protested. Pius VI writes a letter to the Bourbon courts and says this action is absolutely null and void. But you have to keep this absolutely secret that I've written this, because we never have any idea what Catherine might do to the Catholic population there if you protest publicly, or if I protest, the Pope protests publicly. I can't say a word. So no word was officially said back there to Chernyevich in Russia. Catherine sends a delegation to Rome to inform Pius VI of what she'd done. Not ask permission. Nobody gives permission to the Tsarina of Russia. She tells them what goes on, and they better accept it. So in March 1783, the year after the congregation, a delegation goes to inform the Pope of what had happened. In a public meeting there, contrary to that private meeting between Rezanico and Pius VI previously, in a public meeting with the delegation, after Catherine's delegate has told him what's gone on, the Pope says very publicly, in the presence of witnesses, "Approbo, approbo, approbo," 3 times. I approve, I approve, I approve. What did he approve? The fact that there was a delegation, the fact of Catherine's keeping the church alive in Russia, the fact of the novitiate and the existence of a general elected by a general congregation. Nobody could tell. But that was enough, a public statement by Pius VI of what he knew at least was going on, without publicly saying it's specifically this that I approve. But once you had the novitiate, once you had a general, and once you had at least this verbal approbation, it was enough to calm the concerns, not only calm the concerns of Chernyevich and the Polish Jesuits, but also enough, as it got out into other parts of Europe, to convince people who were there and wanted to become members of the society to go to Russia and join the society there, and bring new and fresh blood into the society. In 1785, Chernyevich died, and I'll just give you the names now of the next vicars as they come along. But those were the most important gestures. 1785, a man named Lenkiewicz, Lenkeiwicz, became the Vicar General. He was vicar for a good number of years, from 85 until 1799, when the new vicar was elected, Carew, K-A-R-E-U, until 1802. In 1802, a man named Gabriel Gruber, G-R-U-B-E-R, who was originally Slovenian, was elected vicar. He became a very good friend of the new Tsar, Paul of Russia, extremely good friend, and a very, very capable man. It was a tragedy he died in an accidental fire 3 years later in 1805. And then in 1805, Stanislaus Brzozowski Brzozowski was elected, B-R-Z-O-Z-O-W-S-K-I. And he was Vicar General from 1805 until the Universal Restoration in 1814. And he continued to be general, but the Tsar would not let him leave Russia to go to Rome to be general. And he died in 1820, general of the Universal Society, but still living in Russia itself. I'll tell you more about that a little later. But these were the absolutely extraordinary things that kept the society canonically alive in Russia. Don't think, however, that the society maintaining itself, they're simply huddled, in that house in Polotsk and waited for something to happen. As soon as we got the okays and people began coming to Belarus to join the society, we began expanding into parishes. We even had a mission parish all the way down in the Crimea, and a couple of them in Ukraine, where Germans had come to settle who were Catholics. It was a flourishing kind of situation with a series of schools, of which Polotsk was the biggest, all the way up until the restoration of the society. Remember, too, one other thing. I told you the names of the various vicars that followed Czernowitz, and I mentioned the years, but I didn't say anything about what was happening in the rest of the world in those years. Within a few years after Czernowitz died and Lenkiewicz took over, you know what happened. The French Revolution began in 1789, sweeping from the throne the various kings of Europe. They were not there anymore to guard vigilantly against any universal restoration of the society. And therefore, within Russia itself, the society could pursue its way relatively freely in those years of the revolution, interrupted only, of course, by the French invasion of Russia. Often enough, we think of the French Revolution as if it occurred only in France, and if we read A Tale of Two Cities, the one thing we remember, of course, falsely, is Marie Antoinette saying, "Let them eat cake," and the women hauling the royal family back from Versailles to Paris, and then finally the guillotine being set up, and the king and queen being executed while Madame Defarge sat at the base of the guillotine knitting away. That isn't true of what the revolution was. It wasn't only in France. It touched all of Europe, from the farthest reaches of Spain all the way as far as Moscow in Russia. And it brought about an institutional destruction and havoc that was extraordinary for the society, and not only for the society, but for the whole church all over Europe.